Right, let's look at exercise 2, which was adding and subtracting fractions. Right, question number A. Remember, with adding and subtraction, we need to build a lowest common denominator, and we always want to factorize our denominators first before we build our lowest common denominator. Now, this first one was chosen because the whole number 1, always confuses people. Any whole number confuses people because they think it doesn't have a denominator. It does. Any whole number has a denominator of 1, which means the lowest common denominator between 1 and 3 is 3. So for this denominator to become 3, I would have to multiply by 3, which means what you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So I have 3. Now this denominator is already 3, so I'm minusing. Now be careful, you're minusing that whole thing. So you need a bracket, which is where people get caught out in this particular example. And then it's very simple because I distribute minus 2x plus 5 over 3, which leaves me with minus 2x, and 3 plus 5 is 8 over 3. Now, it doesn't matter whether you write this as 8 minus 2x or minus 2x plus 8. It is the same thing. So please don't forget, when you're minusing a fraction, you're minusing the whole of the numerator. So don't forget your brackets. Right, let's look at B. B is an example where, again, I see this minus, so it applies to that whole fraction. Unfortunately, this time it's just one term at the top. Now, both of these denominators aren't factorized. So I'm going to factorize this denominator, which has the highest common factor of 2, and this denominator has a highest common factor of 5, which means I can clearly see my lowest common denominator needs to have an x minus y in it, and my lowest common denominator, a number that 2 and 5 can go into, would be 10. So clearly this denominator would need to be multiplied by 5 to become 10x minus y. So what you do to the bottom, you do to the top, which gives me 35x. And this denominator would be multiplied by 2 to give me 10x minus y. So I multiply the top by 2, which gives me minus 6x. And that leaves me with 29x at the top divided by 10 and x minus y. Now, I can't simplify any further because the x's cannot cancel, because this x is part of a bracket, which means if you can't cancel the whole bracket, you can't cancel it. And 29 divided by 10, that isn't simplifiable because there isn't a common factor for 10 and 29. So that's our answer. Right, let's look at C. Again, I clearly am going to need to factorize. I've got 2x minus 1 divided by no highest common factor, but definitely a trinomial with x times x. Now, two numbers multiplied together to give me 8. I could do 8 and 1 or 4 and 2. Now, 8 and 1 will never give me 2 as my middle term when I add them together, but 4 and 2 will. So I think it's 4 and 2. But if I need positive 2, I'll need positive 4 and minus 2. Now let me always check. X squared plus 4x minus 2x will give me my 2x, and minus 8. So that does indeed work. Now this is plus x over 4 minus x squared is definitely the difference of 2 squares. So it's 2 minus x, 2 plus x. Now as soon as I write that down, that seems strange. Normally I have my x's in the front of the factor and not in as the second term in a bracket. So that seems weird. Also, what seems weird is that this is x minus 2, and this is 2 minus x. They're almost identical, but the wrong way around. Now, 2 plus x, immediately my brain says to me, isn't 2 plus x and x plus 2 the same thing? Now, the only reason they're the same thing is addition is commutative. It doesn't matter what comes first and second when you're adding. But in subtraction, it does matter. So if I want to swap those two around in the bracket, you can't just do it. It's not the same thing. I can, though, if I change the sign outside. So if I change this sign, so minus, I can swap my factors around in my bracket. So, sorry, my terms around in my bracket. So I have minus x over x minus 2x plus 2. Now, why did I want to do that? I wanted to do that because it's very helpful for me to have identical brackets when I'm trying to create a lowest common denominator, because now I can have x minus 2 as part of my lowest common denominator, and it's in both of them. I don't have to have an x minus 2 and a 2 minus x. I've also got an x plus 4 from that denominator, and I'll also need an x plus 2 from that denominator. So it's quite a complicated denominator. Now, what is this first denominator missing? It's got an x minus 2, it's got an x plus 4. It would need an x plus 2, which means whatever you do to the bottom, I'm going to have to do to the top. Now notice I put in these brackets, very, very important. So at the top I've got 2x minus 1, and it needs to be multiplied by x plus 2, minus, now what does this denominator need? It's got an x minus 2, it's got an x plus 2, it's missing an x plus 4, but what you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So I've got minus x plus 4. Now all I've got to do is multiply out and collect up like terms. So 2x times x will give me 2x squared. 2x times 2 plus 4x minus x minus 2, and minus x squared and minus 4x all over my lowest common denominator. Now, as I've said before, I'm not going to multiply out my lowest common denominator because it doesn't actually get me anywhere to multiply out the bottom. I'm going to collect up like terms at the top. So 2x squared, take away an x squared is x squared. 4x, take away 4x, disappears, and I've still got a minus x, so minus x and minus 2. And so I've got x minus 2, x plus 4, x plus 2. Now lots of people stop here because they think they're done. Don't forget that I could still simplify this. Now I can't right now because the top isn't one term, but if I factorize the top, if it's possible, possibly something could cancel. Now you never know whether it can before you start factorizing. So I always, as I've said before, I always factorize the top and see if I can cancel. So this is exactly why I didn't multiply at that bottom. Now x squared minus x minus 2 is a trinomial, which means it could be factorized, x times x. Two things multiplied together to give you 2 would have to be 2 and 1. Could I possibly get minus 1? I could have a minus 2 and a plus 1. That might work. X squared minus 2x plus an x would give me minus x and minus 2. So that is indeed correct. Now, in this particular example, it doesn't often happen, but absolutely this was essential because I could see that an x minus 2 could cancel. So in fact, this does simplify to x plus 1 over x plus 4, x plus 2. So don't fall into the trap of not going further from that step there. Right, and our last example looks like this. Again, I am minusing, which means I need a lowest common denominator, and that looks like it's factorizable. Neither of those look like they're factorizable, so I'm going to have 4 plus x minus x over 4 minus x. Now, as soon as I write that down, something seems funny about that. I normally have x minus 4, now I've got 4 minus x. So I might want to swap that order, although I'm not allowed to just swap it because there's a minus. Anyway, let me carry on, and x squared minus 16 is the difference of 2 squares. Now, as soon as I write down that, I realize that swapping this around is essential because this is x minus 4. So if I want them to look identical for my lowest common denominator, it would be useful to do a switcheroo. So I've got 4 plus x. In actual fact, can I not write that immediately as x plus 4? Do I need to make any sign changes? Absolutely not, because addition is commutative, so I can swap it around. Subtraction is not, though. So if I want this denominator to be x minus 4, I need to change this sign and make it a plus. So I get plus x over x minus 4 and minus 8x over x minus 4, x plus 4, which means my common denominator is pretty obvious. I need an x plus 4 and I need an x minus 4. So if I look at my first fraction, it's missing an x minus 4. So what you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So I've got 4x minus 4. If I look at my second fraction, I'm missing an x plus 4. What you do to the bottom, I do to the top. So plus x plus 4. And my third fraction, the denominator is perfect. So I don't need anything. So I've got minus 8x. So again, I've got to multiply, collect up like terms, and check whether factorizing would help simplify. So 4x minus 16 plus x squared plus 4x minus 8x over x plus 4, x minus 4. Right, like terms, 4x plus 4x would give me 8x, but when I subtracted 8x, those all cancelled out. So I've got minus 16 and plus x squared. Now, as soon as I write it down that way, I think to myself, don't I normally write down x squareds first? And can't I rather write that as x squared minus 16? Now, I'm also saying that because that I immediately recognize as a difference of squares, whereas minus 16 plus x squared I don't recognize. And don't forget, I'm more than welcome to swap them around as long as they keep their signs with them. So it was minus 16. And I immediately know that this is going to factorize. So I immediately can tell that this will be x minus 4, x plus 4 over x plus 4, x minus 4. And this, in actual fact, x plus 4 goes into itself once, x minus 4 goes into itself once, and it simplifies to 1. Don't forget to find lots of past papers on these and practice until you're 100% confident.